scenario. We welcome that the UK government published a white paper setting out its position on the future EU-UK relationship. It shows that also from the British side a close relationship is of importance. We are now getting into a serious phase of negotiations. We discussed and we agreed that more efforts are needed so that the withdrawal agreement can be concluded as soon as possible. Work must also be accelerated with a view to preparing a political declaration on the framework for the future relationship. And the EU's work on preparedness has to be stepped up. It was a unanimous situation when we discussed about the unity of 27. It's absolutely key that we keep up the unity of 27, and we fully support Michel Barnier and his team and asked him to continue negotiations in line with our agreed positions. Let me also stress that for all the member states it's a key issue that the Irish border issue is solved. We still have no substantial progress on an operational backstop for the Irish border. Both parties agreed that we need a backstop, and without a solution we have no deal and we have no transition. It is our aim to reach a deal until October. The outcome is crucial because at the end of the day it's about the future of the people, businesses and European borders. The European Union will continue to pursue its analysis of the white paper in line with the principles set out by the European Council. I want to thank Michel Barnier for his really intensive and utmost job, and may hand the floor to him.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being so patient and for being here. I'd like to begin by thanking Gernot and the Austrian presidency. I'd like to wish them all the best, but I'd also like to thank them for having given us the opportunity at the beginning of their presidency to have a General Affairs Council meeting. It was a long meeting, a very intense meeting, but a very useful one for both my team and myself. Everyone had the opportunity to share their analysis, their ideas, to put questions. I often say, ladies and gentlemen, that the unity of the 27 that Gernot just referred to, unity that was confirmed today, isn't a God-given. It's a unity that is achieved by listening to each other, by listening to the institutions, to the European Parliament, as well as the Council. And for my team and myself, there is a degree of transparency and objectivity that we are going to continue applying, listening to each and every member state. So thank you very much, Austrian presidency and Gernot, for having taken this initiative. And as I said, I'd like to wish you all the best for the Austrian presidency, because you're taking over the presidency at a key moment, because it is during the Austrian presidency that we will have to reach an agreement on this negotiations with the UK, agreement on the withdrawal agreement, as well as the political declaration. There are 13 weeks left. Our aim at the moment, our main aim is to continue and conclude on the withdrawal agreement. As you know, what is in green is agreed, so 8% has already been agreed with the British. And then in parallel to this, we also once we finalise this agreement, need to work with the UK to come up with a joint political declaration on the future relationship. Now, this morning, as Gernot requested, I shared our analysis with the 27 ministers, this at the end of a new week of negotiations, and in the light of the discussions that we had yesterday with the new Brexit minister, Dominic Raab. I had a very useful and very cordial meeting with him yesterday. And as you know, a few days ago, we received the UK's white paper on the future relationship. As you know, this white paper is the result of a very intense internal debate in the United Kingdom, a debate that was necessary. And I think we've all seen that this debate in the UK is not over yet. As I said to the ministers, there are several elements in this white paper that does open the way to a constructive discussion leading to the political declaration on our future relationship. Let me quote a few of the positive elements. The proposal for a free trade agreement, which will be at the very heart of our future economic relations. Now, basically, we have a key proposal there that this was part of the Council guidelines, namely that we need an ambitious free trade agreement. The second element, commitments to a level playing field, especially as regards state aid and the rules on employment and environment. And thirdly, a broad convergence on the need in fact, the absolute need to cooperate on both internal and external security. And on this point, what is actually very important and positive in the UK White Paper is the guarantees that are going to be provided for defending fundamental rights and the recognition of the role to be played by the European Court of Justice as sole arbiter. Why is that important? Because this breakthrough with the support of the UK and the European Court of Human Rights means that the exchange of data will be made easier between the UK and us, whilst protecting the fundamental rights of citizens. So this opens up the possibility of us extending our offer on internal security cooperation in particular. As to the future economic partnership, the White Paper has raised three series of issues which I put forward, and we have questions that we have put to the UK, and we await answers. Firstly, the White Paper proposals. We need to see if they are compatible with the principles set out by the 27 heads of government and state at the European Council meeting in March. In fact, even before March, when the negotiations began in June 2016. These are principles that were reiterated by the foreign ministers today. Integrity of the single market and the customs union, the indivisibility of the four freedoms, and the respect of the autonomy of the EU decision-making of the 27 member states. These are three key elements that were in the mandate of the European Council, in my mandate, and I will be scrupulously respecting them right through to the end. Of course, our main aim is to protect the EU's single market, to protect what we are at this moment in time. Let me give you one example. The UK says that they are willing to align itself on the EU standards for goods, but only for goods that are checked at the border. The UK consequently would not align itself to our agro-food rules as regards GMOs or pesticides, because the respect of these rules is not checked at the border. And this was in fact confirmed to us this week in the negotiations. So how can we protect consumers in Europe? We have a duty of care to protect consumers in the single market. And on which basis could we accept a free circulation of goods? So that is a question that we have put to the UK. A second question. Are these white paper proposals workable? Are they applicable without any additional complexity or additional bureaucracy? For example, the regulatory alignment on goods, and furthermore on what the facilitated customs arrangements as proposed by the UK. As you will have seen, these proposals would mean two tariffs would be applied, either the UK tariff or the Union tariff, or goods that are going to go to the UK market or whether they are to go to the European market, respectively. So this creates practical problems. For example, how can the customs services verify the final destination of the goods so as to choose the correct tariff, so as to ensure that they apply the correct tariff? Is there not a major risk of fraud? What would be the financial and administrative extra costs be for businesses given this new dual system? Now, Brexit cannot and will not justify additional bureaucracy. What would the impact be if the UK has tariffs lower than the EU tariffs? What impact would it have on the finances of the member states? And such a complex system would also raise a much more fundamental question. How could the EU delegate the application of EU tariffs to a country that is no longer a member state, that is no longer subject to our rules of governance? And is it possible? Is it legally feasible? And then a third set of questions we put to the UK. Are the British proposals in the interests of the EU? As we said, our aim is to protect the interests of the EU in these negotiations. Well, by definition, the common rule book for goods would not only cover services, because the UK wants to be free to diverge on the rules for services. Now, as you know, in any product that we have, take this, your telephone, between 20 and 40% of the value of this good is linked to services. So how will we avoid unfair competition via the services? Because the UK would be free to diverge on the services. So how can we avoid unfair competition vis-à-vis EU companies? How could an autonomous British trade independence be feasible? How can we allow that? How can we avoid UK companies having a significant competitive edge vis-à-vis the EU companies? So these are the sort of questions that I put to the UK delegation
today with Dominic Raab. And we will continue this discussion and look constructively at the answers we will get to our questions. But our main focus must be and will be the finalization of the withdrawal agreement. Let me recall that the withdrawal agreement is the prerequisite for an orderly withdrawal, also for the transition period, and for creating the trust that we need to build a solid partnership for the future. This requires, in particular, as you mentioned, Gernot, a legally operative backstop, an all-weather insurance policy to address the issues of Ireland and Northern Ireland, and all 27 member states insist on this. Why? Because we are committed to protecting Ireland and Northern Ireland against the consequences of Brexit and to preserve the Good Friday Agreement in all its dimensions. I said this on my last visit in Ireland and Northern Ireland a few weeks ago, where I engaged with stakeholders across both communities. Let me simply recall the commitment taken by Prime Minister Theresa May to have a backstop in her letter to President Tusk in March, and the respect of this commitment is essential. And I made clear yesterday to Dominic Raab that we are not asking for a border between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK. What we need is checks on goods, because the UK wants to leave the single market, the customs union, and our common commercial policy. We cannot afford to lose time on this issue, and this is why we have invited the UK to work on the backstop next week. We are open to any solutions any solutions, as long as they are workable and can be transformed into a legally operative text in time for the withdrawal agreement. Ladies and gentlemen, even if we want to reach a deal, it is also our responsibility to be prepared for all scenarios, including a no deal. As the European Council said, we have to step up preparation at all levels for all scenarios. And the communication adopted yesterday by the Commission should be read in this context. We are encouraging national administrations and companies to use the time we have, which is short, very short, to accelerate this preparation. Finalement, mesdames et messieurs, nous devons...
Finally, ladies and gentlemen, we need to find an agreement on all the outstanding issues in the withdrawal agreement. This, of course, includes the issue of Ireland and Northern Ireland. That's the most serious issue, but also the British military bases in Cyprus and, obviously, Gibraltar. Now, each of these issues is important, and we need to have an agreement on each and every one of these issues. Agreement on them is necessary prior to us adopting a withdrawal agreement. They are necessary. With the UK, we need to also draw up the joint political declaration on our future relationship, this by October. Now, at this stage in the negotiations, we don't have many weeks left, but it's not a matter of needing more time. It's a matter of choosing the right decisions and being absolutely clear, because after all, we are creating an international legal treaty, so we need legal certainty and legal clarity. So the earlier we can achieve this certainty and clarity, the earlier we can start discussions on our future partnership. We want this to be as ambitious as possible, not only on trade and on the economic front, but on other areas of common interest, and also so that we can have a strategic partnership that would have an internal security aspect to it, as well as a foreign policy and defense aspect to it. Thank you.
We now have time for a couple of questions. Please tell us who you are and who you work for. Jennifer, please.
Thank you. It's Jennifer Rankin from The Guardian. And to Mr. Barnier, you raised a number of questions about, especially on the customs and single market aspects of the white paper. Is that a polite way of saying no to the British proposals? And can you say also how much agreement on these points you expect in the political declaration? And are you conscious of the fact that the British Prime Minister will find it difficult to sell that political declaration and to sell the withdrawal agreement unless there's sufficient detail? Is that a factor that weighs in your mind? Thank you.
First of all, you will find that I'm always very polite. I can put issues and disagreements and alerts in very, very polite terms, and I will continue to do this, because as I've been saying from the outset, in my attitude as a European negotiator, there will never be any trace of aggressiveness or a desire for revenge or anything like that, for quite a number of reasons. I work and I wish to work on behalf of the 27 and the European Parliament towards an agreement, towards an orderly withdrawal and, of course, future relations. And it's within that constructive spirit that we have read and will continue to examine the ideas which the United Kingdom has published, which is a good thing, of course, because it facilitates the discussion. I recalled a number of positive and important points in the white paper, which will be useful elements when it comes to constructing an agreement on the various chapters or points of a future political declaration on future relations. And, of course, other points, that applies to the points on economic relations as well, where we've still got quite a number of questions. Questions which we're asking to be able to better understand how the UK proposals might work, for example, in customs. There are issues that we in the Commission services don't understand. It needs to be workable. clearly these proposals or ideas need to be fully compliant with the guidelines from the European Council, the four freedoms, the integrity of the single market. We're not going to negotiate on those, of course, because that's what the UK wishes to leave, and we need to find the best possible relations, but never to the detriment of the single market and the unity of that market.
Paddy Smith, Irish Times. You will be aware that Mrs. May has made a speech in Belfast today in which she You'll be aware that Mrs. May has made a speech in Belfast today in which she has reiterated her belief that the only way to do the backstop is on an all-UK basis. I wonder if you would respond to that. You've already largely rejected that proposal. Is there a way forward on that? And secondly, is there have been reports that the Commission is preparing an alternative draft to the protocol. Is that the case, and how far has that developed?
Non, mais moi, j'essaie.
Well, in these negotiations, I've always tried to say things simply and also always tell the truth. Now, this is the most serious and most difficult problem. Now, the European Council and the Member States insisted that if we are to have a withdrawal agreement, and we want an orderly withdrawal, they insisted that we have a legally workable solution in the withdrawal agreement on Ireland. And then, if we find a better solution in the future relationship, then we can replace one by the other. But in the meantime, if we want a withdrawal agreement, we need an operational solution in order to preserve the Good Friday Agreement in all its dimensions, and so as to avoid a hard border. Now, this was also agreed to by Theresa May. That's all I can say. Obviously, I listen to speeches, I follow visits, but this was agreed in March in a letter addressed by Theresa May to the President of the European Council, Donald Tusk. Now, we ourselves have been creative and flexible in our work. We have proposed one solution, but as I said earlier on, at no moment whatsoever was it our intention to create a border in the Irish Sea between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK. We have never wanted that, but we need to find the right place and the right time to carry out checks that we need to protect consumers and to protect the single market. So what really is at stake here is the work that has to be done, pragmatic work, pragmatism. We need to look at which checks have to be carried out. Now, we've got the list of all the checks that have to be carried out at external borders that are currently carried out at the borders of the UK, Finland, Greece and Portugal. These are checks that are already carried out. There's a whole host of checks. So we've got to look at this list of checks to be carried out and see how on the island of Ireland we can carry out these checks. We're talking about technical controls on the goods. Obviously, there's no problem with the circulation of people. So I would plead with you, please, let's de-dramatize this whole issue of the checks and the backstop. We need to de-dramatize things. So that's my answer. And I'd just like to reiterate what was agreed on at the earlier levels of the negotiations. And today's ministers agreed that we need to respect what has been agreed already.
David Herzenhorn with Politico. Given the difficulty of the Ireland border issue, and given that if there's no deal, no withdrawal agreement, there is also no backstop, is there any reason you couldn't push the discussion of the backstop into the transition, which provides its own backstop, a stand-in-place transition, and give yourself the 21 months more to talk about the Ireland issue? Is there a reason why it absolutely has to be done by in the withdrawal treaty before March 29, 2019?
But let me just say that for Ireland and Northern Ireland and for all part of this negotiation, I'm working for a deal, not for a no deal. You don't need a negotiator for a no deal. Huh? You need a negotiator to reach a deal. That is my point.
But given the risk, could you push it, given the risk that if there's no deal, there's no backstop? So if you have a withdrawal agreement, a divorce treaty, could you give yourself 21 more months to negotiate on the Ireland border during the transition?
Non, je vous ai dit, il y aura un...
What I was saying is, there will be a deal if there is an agreement on a backstop. It's not necessarily our backstop, just to reply to the question you asked before. We can work on this, amend it, improve our backstop. The one which the Commission proposed on behalf of the Union. Technically, we feel that it's workable. We can improve it further. We can work on it. We're doing that work to reply specifically to the previous question you asked. But we need an operational backstop now in the withdrawal agreement and not later.
And the last one, Thomas.
Yuri Kuchkevich pour le journal Le Soir ici. Bonjour, Monsieur Barnier. Vous venez de...
Mr. Barnier, you've just explained what sort of questions you put on the white paper. As you said, you're always very courteous, but there are major stumbling points in the white paper. Now, the white paper is not the same, but already it's been amended this week, and we see that at the moment in Westminster there seems to be no perspective of a majority on any kind of Brexit. And then the Prime Minister, in her speech in Belfast today, said that you need to change your viewpoint on the backstop. So my question isn't actually on all of that, but my question is, given all of this, knowing that businesses are going to have to start preparing, as the Commission has warned them, when do you think should you assume your responsibility and tell economic operators and businesses that the prospect of a no deal is on the horizon? So when will that be? Is it going to be in October? Will it be the 29th of March? When will you draw this conclusion? Or as a negotiator, are you going to go right through to the end and keep negotiating right through to the end?
Faut être réaliste.
Well, we have to be realistic. My aim is to reach an agreement. It's not going to be easy. I said that right from the very first day when I took on this job. It's an extraordinarily complex set of negotiations. And as the negotiations have panned out, we see how complex it is. And we've seen it from the House of Commons, how complex it is, leaving the EU, the customs union. So it's not only at the EU level that we've got to accept the consequences of this decision, it's also in the UK. As I mentioned, the problems with the customs union earlier on. There's no reason why European enterprises and businesses should bear the brunt of the decision to leave the EU. But my aim is to reach an agreement, which will be difficult and it will take a lot of time over the summer and after. If you look at the countdown, the UK itself set the deadline as the 29th of March. They've enshrined it in British law. It's the UK that chose this deadline, not us. They are the ones that chose the date of the 29th of March 2019. So we need some months to ratify an agreement. There's no choice. You have to have ratification by the Council of Ministers, the European Parliament, and then the British Parliament, which is sovereign. So if you count down, take away these months that are necessary for ratification, that basically means that we have to note that there is or there is not an agreement before December. And we will have to take stock of the situation, and we will do our best to note that there is a withdrawal agreement. And we're not far. There's only 20% of the text that needs to be agreed. And in fact, already this week, we made some progress on certain issues. We've got Ireland still. And we are working on the basis of what was agreed in March with Theresa May. So that's the basis for our work. And we are willing and open to work on all British ideas. But the time schedule is what it is, because otherwise we have a real problem running into the ratification period. I hope that was clear. I mean, I can't tell you a specific date, a particular day when we're going to say what's what. But the Secretariat General, and I'd like to say that all the delegations thank the Secretariat General and the Commission. They've done an excellent work to come up with a preparedness scenario. We need to be prepared, whatever the outcome is. There is a degree of preparedness that is necessary. We need to prepare the deal, because it's not something we can just invent overnight. As I was saying to the ministers this morning, the only business as usual option for our economy is Norway Plus, being a member of the single market plus the customs union. So there will be consequences if there is no deal, and we have to prepare for the situation of a no deal.
To finish. The two last questions. If Gernot is okay, it's okay. Agree. Sure.
I'm over here. Thomas Meyer at the Standard. I have two questions, if I may, and I would like to ask them in German. So meine erste Frage.
Okay, my first question is for Chief Negotiator Mr. Barnier. Could I pick up on what you were saying yourself a moment ago in stressing that there are only a few weeks left to negotiate this to a conclusion? You said we need clarity and decisiveness at the very highest level. Which brings me to the question which reminds me of the final round of accession negotiations, which seems to apply equally to exit negotiations. Is it true that for November there's to be a summit where the final big issues needed for a deal could be dealt with? And my second question is for the Austrian presidency, Minister Blümel. We've had a declaration from Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker this week, who refused ultimately to be accused of having problems with alcohol. He said he wanted more respect. So this went directly to the foreign ministry in Vienna, it would seem, where the accusations were coming from the FPÖ in Vienna and from Deputy Chancellor Strache, apparently. So do you have any intentions, is there any apology forthcoming from the Austrian ministry?
Sur le temps qui court et qui est rapide.
Time is moving on swiftly, and we don't have much of that left. That's why I often reiterate that the clock is ticking. I think we have sufficient time to find an agreement on a withdrawal agreement, because we're not that far. When it comes to the work we are willing to continue on, and indeed intensify, with regard to a backstop for Ireland, and we do need to reach an agreement with the UK on this, and on a political declaration, where, of course, the white paper is useful. I'm not negotiating, of course, on the basis of the white paper. I wish to work on the basis of the guidelines from the European Council, which you may wish to reread, which were issued in March and are very precise. This is a kind of an offer for global partnership, which we can offer to the UK. The political declaration will accompany the withdrawal agreement and will specify and set out in detail this future partnership. So what I will be doing in the coming days and weeks is, together with the UK, to seek out where common ground exists. Common ground between our guidelines and the UK ideas on future relations. It's up to the President of the European Council, Donald Tusk, to organize the work. We always said November, some say October, some say November. In any case, in the autumn, we will be ready to take stock. And of course, there's the meeting in Salzburg organized by the Austrian presidency. It's not up to me then to organize the details there. I work in full trust together with President Tusk and his team. But coming back to your previous question and the countdown, okay, you know, a few weeks here or there, October, November, a definitive agreement will be needed in any case to launch the ratification process. I'll just reply briefly to that, if I may. All I can say is that I confirm that we cooperate very, very well at all levels with the European Commission, not only in the individual sectors, but also, of course, clearly together with President Jean-Claude Juncker. The federal government came for a long and intensive set of discussions with the Commission in June in Brussels. The Commission visited us at the beginning of our presidency, at the beginning of July, and the mood has always been very, very good. And on this debate, well, I'm not going to get involved in that particular discussion. We have committed ourselves to a new style, and I would invite everybody to go along with that.
Damien Grammaticus from BBC. Mr. Barnier, you made a point of saying that there's just 13 weeks left. And when you talked about the backstop, you said you're prepared to look at the rewording that a bit. Theresa May said today that it's not acceptable, the version that is on the table. So are you saying that it has to be a version of what you've put on the table or nothing at all? And also on the issue of the white paper, you said very clearly that you have to defend the four freedoms, the integrity of the single market. The white paper splits up services and goods. It asks for a customs arrangement. So are you saying that the white paper, it has elements that you can talk about, but it's not going to be the basis of an agreement there either?
Yeah. Plusieurs éléments.
Well, there are several elements in the white paper that are very useful for our discussions. I just said we're not going to negotiate on the basis of the white paper because that's the British paper, but we could use many elements of the white paper. I referred to some of them, and we can work on the basis of these elements to build what I called the common ground between the EU and the UK, so that we can make progress and achieve this partnership. There's one point that is very important, a point that I've been very keen on as a former Foreign Affairs Minister, that is security and defence, internal security. I think here we do have true convergence between the white paper and what we are proposing, because that is vital for the security and stability of our continent. There were other questions that do give rise to a few problems. I've referred to some of them. I referred them to London as well. And there are some elements which do seem to contradict the guidelines of the EU Council, the heads of government and state, namely the indivisibility of the four freedoms and the integrity of the single market. There's not an awful lot of justification for the EU running the risk of weakening the single market. That is our main asset. And there's no justification for us to create additional burdens on business just because the UK wants to leave. If you look at the political situation today, we have many reasons to keep and protect our single market, find ways of cooperating with the UK whilst respecting their decision to leave the EU and looking at the red lines of the UK. They're the ones that have established the red lines. They don't want the Court of Justice involved anymore. They're the ones that laid down the red lines. So we will try and make headway. I'm sure we will find a way forward. But we're going to work on the basis of the positive elements in this white paper, and we await the answers to the questions that we've put to the UK.
On the question of the backstop, are you essentially saying it's a version of what you've put down so far or nothing? That you can adapt it, but that's it, it's this backstop?
Soyez simple.
Look, let's be simple. The problem in Ireland is checking goods. It's not a border, but you've got to check the goods. to protect consumers and protect businesses. Look at the list. I published a list of checks that are carried out at all the external borders of the Union, checks that are carried out there, so as not to have checks in the internal borders. Phytosanitary controls, veterinary checks, checks on products of animal origin. These are checks that are already carried out in Belfast. Some of these checks are already carried out in Belfast on goods that come from the remainder of the UK. And it's on this basis that we want to ensure that we can carry out checks on goods. Now, we're going to continue working on this, and ministers have confirmed the mandate that we have. We need a backstop in the withdrawal agreement, perhaps not our backstop, but there will be a backstop in order to guarantee, whatever the scenario is, that we have no hard border in Ireland, and that we can guarantee the Good Friday Agreement. And then if in the future, in the discussions with the UK, we find a better solution, we'll opt for a better solution. So yes, there will be a backstop, not necessarily ours, but there will be a backstop. And we are happy to work as long as it is legally workable. Legally workable from the moment that we sign the treaty.
This was the last question for today. Have a nice summer.
No?